It's
All
great to
right.
see you. The last time we
Good
talked
seeing you
was
too.
for your album Flow, I think. That was
I know, I
a couple
know.
years ago. Yeah, and you've been to
That's right.
Toledo, so welcome back virtually.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Today we're going to talk about your recording, which is called Starlighter. It's the title track by Colin Jacobson, but you've written a couple of pieces on this CD also. I
Mhm.
almost think the CD should be called Indie Elements,
Uh,
because it seems like that's the sort of the centerpiece of the whole album. First of all, let me introduce you. Kinan Azmeh is a wonderful clarinetist, composer, improviser. I think last time I ran out of sobriquets to describe you, but you have so much going on. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the album itself, Starlighter, and how it came together.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your very kind words and of introduction. The album actually is a result of many, many years of friendship between me and the different members of Brooklyn Rider. I've known these guys throughout the years in New York. Actually, even before coming to New York, Johnny Gandlisman and I met in France in '97 by chance. And then we found each other again in New York. Colin, I knew him closely through the Silk Road Ensemble together with his brother Eric. Eric was part of Brooklyn Rider before Michael Nicholas joined. Michael and I were at the same time at Juilliard, and we were like more or less the same height. So I used to borrow sometimes his tails for our Juilliard orchestra concerts, and we played together the Brahms Clarinet Trio, I believe, together as part of like school activities. And Nick also records I knew from the Silk Road Ensemble. But beyond the professional life, we used to hang out a lot, and in informal jam sessions, if you want, at parties and stuff. We always brought instruments, so we always jam. If I started, I would like to say like these are my New York childhood friends. I didn't move to New York when I was a child. I was 24 when I moved here, but it seems to me like one of my earliest memories of New York City is together with these guys. And so we wanted to make a project happen for many many years, and I witnessed the group grow and become the Brooklyn Rider we know today. And we kept a close eyes to what we're doing, and so it felt only natural to finally give birth to this album together with Matthias Kunzli, who's been a collaborator and a dear friend with Brooklyn Rider and myself for many years.
Yeah.
And for the program, for what we wanted to play, I brought two pieces. Brooklyn Rider commissioned me to write a piece, Debke on Marquette Street, which I wrote during lockdown, during the pandemic. And in the element is a piece that was commissioned by two different quartets. One of them is the Apple Hill Center for Chamber, the Apple Hill String Quartet, and the other one is Quatuor Voce in France. They commissioned the piece, but then I brought it to Brooklyn Rider for us to record it. And there's a piece by a dear friend, also he's part of the family, who's Lev Jurbin, who wrote us a gorgeous piece. And so that's in a nutshell how this album came together. But again, it just feels naturally that we will record and play together.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your music in the element. First of all, there's three different movements. You mentioned two of them were written for one orchestra, which are titled Run and Rain. There's a very specific memory tied to that. And then also
Mhm.
Grounded, which I think kind of speaks to this dichotomy that I hear sometimes in your music between the celebration of friendship and the sorrow of the civil war that's still going on in Syria. It's been 12 years now, I think. I wonder if you can start with the story of Run and Rain, and then take us to Grounded and how that expresses itself in your music.
Absolutely. The thing is, I'm sorry if I'm repeating things that I already told you in earlier interviews, but I do think like lots of my music revolves around the same questions. It's not that I'm trying to attempt to answer these questions, but the questions become deeper and they become part of the answer. Is actually, I think sometimes it's enough just to ask for a question or ask a question and get busy with the search for an answer rather than just finding an answer. So what I want to say is this work has a lot to do with the idea of home and how that means when somebody says, "How are you doing?" and somebody says, "I feel I'm in my element." That's usually a sense of comfort. There's something comfortable with that. There's a sense of belonging. There's a sense of knowing, the social norm, the social code. You know what to do, and you feel you belong, and it's a place you would like to contribute to that place. Apple Hill Center for Chamber Music is where I came as a teenager in '92 for 1 month to study chamber music, and it was the first time that I played chamber music ever in my life. I was 16 at the time. And I kept a great connection with this center. So I came back as coach, like maybe 10 years later or 15 years later. So now I go every summer to teach. And in one of these summers, that's in 2017, I believe, I went for a run in the camp, and I was caught in a rainstorm. So I went back to the camp, and I was sitting on one of these benches outside, looking up. I always love to run, and I'm always like a big fan of rain. I think growing up in Damascus, a city where it doesn't rain very much, I have this special connection. Every time it rains, winter or summer, when I was back in Damascus, I used to go for a run or for a walk at least. And this time was no different, but I was in North America. And I went to the camp, and I was sitting on one of these benches outside. And the rest of the camp, everybody was seeking shelter somewhere. And a friend of mine looked out, and she took a photo of me sitting on these benches. And she said, here's one person in his element. And this idea brought to me the sense I felt I was fully myself in that moment. In a place that seemingly is very far from my home. But yet it felt very close. I have memories. I grew musically in that space. And the rain that was falling for me was something that is very meaningful. And so so when they commissioned me to write a piece, the Appalachian Quartet, it was natural for me that I wanted to immortalize that idea of the space, but also of the moment. And I was thinking also after I finished the piece of how this relates to an idea of home, what that means. A couple of years later, I went home to Damascus after 6 or 7 years of not going. And the first feeling I had was, wow, I'm grounded. I feel complete again. And that trip to Damascus was maybe 2 or 3 days, not more. But it was enough for me to bring this seed of a piece. And I felt this piece has to belong to the first 2 movements. It has to come right after that. So that's what we ended up having in the element as a suite: rain, run, and grounded. And I think the whole piece is about again, questioning the idea of home, what that means in a variety of places, and how much it's connected not only geographically, but also to nature, and how the feeling of belonging is as important as what home can mean to other people.
I love the story or the quote from Colin Jacobson talking about the clarinet as sort of the torch leading the way in the cave for the strings to come behind. And when you listen to In the Element, it starts out that way. It starts out with the clarinet kind of slowly finding its way and ending in the frenzy of a chamber rainstorm, as it were, that you have going on. And I wonder, when you're composing for yourself, right, or for the instrument, I mean, is the instrument front and center for you? Do you work from the clarinet back, or do you have a whole chamber concept as what you want to create?
I like to think that I think concept first. So basically, I have to be obsessed with an idea. I always think of this when it comes to the arts. You have to have an idea. Otherwise, there's no point. If I want to talk to you right now, if I don't have anything to tell you, there's no need for me to produce the sounds I'm producing right now. And I think the same way about composition. You have to have something you want to say. it doesn't have to be concrete, and it doesn't have to be super polished, but it has to be an idea that moves you, because by extension, it will move the listener. So in that, in that way of working, I don't think of the instrument. The instrument is only a tool to express the idea. And certainly, it's not that I hold the clarinet and try to play on it until I come up with an idea. Usually, I try to think with a piece of paper and a pen, or sometimes with my phone. I record lots of like voice memos to myself every time I have an idea. And once you have an idea that you like, that's when sometimes I try stuff out on the clarinet or on the keyboard, on the piano, just to see how the voicing and the harmony would work. And I would like to think also that I write for people, not for instruments.
Mm.
At the end of the day, yes, there's 4 string players, a clarinetist, and a percussionist. But I would like to think that I'm writing for Matthias, or for Colin, or for Johnny, or for the other string players who commissioned the work, Mike, Elise, all these guys. So I'm writing for individuals, but then more and more you detach yourself from the person, and then you end up having a score that doesn't have people's name, but it have instruments. Believing that whoever is going to see the score hopefully will relate to the original concept that I had for the piece.
Yeah. Is there any improv involved in that piece? Because it sounds a little improvisatory at times.
There is. And this is something that I think you might see like constant in also my work. I always try to walk that very fine line between the compose and the improvise. I do think some of the best written music is one that sounds spontaneous, as if it was improvised, and some of the best improvisations are ones that sound composed because they are structured and you see kind of the progression of thoughts in it. And so in this piece, there are parts that are improvised, but I always like to bring that aspect of freedom in the music I write. The improvised part are not only in the clarinet part, but also I allow the other instrumentalists to have, the freedom to bring their own character into the music. And it's not like, okay, here's a solo section and then we're moving on. Even in the written lines, I'll bring lots of freedom to that. And rehearsing with a group like Brooklyn Ryder and Matthias, you have an incredible aspect of music making, because everybody is an improviser, everybody can read music, and everybody is like super on top of their game in terms of chamber music, but also solo work. So you can do pretty much everything with that group. I feel very lucky that we got to do this together.
Let's talk about the other piece of yours on this recording, which is kind of like a memory that doesn't exist. It's an idea of this wild dance on this street. Can you tell us a little bit about that piece? It's just for string quartet, right?
That's right.
So you were sitting out that time.
I was Brooklyn Ryder commissioned me to write the piece for one of these online concerts that happened during the pandemic. And during that time, I was processing this whole idea of what does home mean? All of us were stuck in one place. And suddenly, I started to discover my immediate surrounding. We were lucky, my wife and I moved to a place in Brooklyn that has a little backyard. So we went back to the basics. Basically, we grew tomatoes, we were making bread. But planting trees in the backyard, after 20-something years of living in New York, it was the first time that I touched the soil of the city, Yeah. And that got me suddenly much closer to the city. And I don't want to say thanks to the pandemic, but I think thanks to the fact that I was home for a longer period, where I was looking vertically deep into the ground, for the first time. It was the first time that after living in New York for all these years, that I noticed the different seasons, for example. Because most of the time I go on tour and I come back and, there's snow all over the city. Like I missed these transitions. But this time I was able to witness them up close. And I noticed my neighbors for the first time. I became much closer to my neighbors. And this is also a time where I felt it was like every time there's all these block parties happening, this is pre-pandemic, of course. And I was thinking like, okay, maybe one day there will be this kind of like a dance party on the block where Dabke, which is a very known dance form in the Arab world, maybe people will eventually hold hands and dance to this Arabic rhythm. The Arabic classical rhythm doesn't exist in the piece. So again, it's a fantasy on a fantasy on a fantasy. But I was in a celebratory mood, and I wanted to write something that that has some kind of futuristic optimism built in. So that's what I ended up writing.
Well, I think people that maybe haven't lived in the kind of situation you're talking about in Brooklyn. I've lived in Brooklyn myself. I was in a house with a little backyard like what you're describing, and I can
Right.
imagine the kind of neighborhood parties, the kind of thing that would go on occasionally. It's a big deal. I mean, maybe people can't quite picture it, but they can enjoy the music as well. And like you say, that traditional dance form in there through your language it's really catchy. It's really fun to listen to, I have to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's I think you can see it all over the world. Like the whole idea of holding hands and moving to a rhythm is obviously universal. I don't see much of that in the Brooklyn parties that I've been around, but I always think like, the fabric of the city is so diverse and it's so complex and beautiful
Yeah.
that hopefully, one day people will, a Dabke dance will appear among these activities in block parties, not only in Brooklyn, but also around the whole world.
Do you want to talk about some of the other music on the disc? I know Starlighter, the title track, has something to do with photosynthesis, which we don't really exactly know how that works, especially on the quantum
Right.
level. So, it's perfect for music because it has that sense of ambiguity to it. But what do you want to say about Starlighter and the other piece by Lev Jourbin?
Both pieces, I like how diverse this album ended up being. Colin's piece, uh, it's like a tour of, like everybody is used to the maximum of their ability. We're all playing, and it's incredibly complex and incredibly beautiful. It's one of the pieces where I cannot remove my head from the page when I'm playing. You have to, of course, pay attention, but it's really super demanding, and and you can tell how closely inspired it is by the canon, of like the German music works that exist for clarinet and string quartet, namely the Brahms quintet and the Mozart clarinet quintet.
Mozart, yeah.
And you can see some fragments of that appear here and there if you know the words already. There's no direct quote or anything, but you can feel the weight if you want. And like I said, Colin was inspired by how incredible, how much of a little miracle that is, this whole idea of photosynthesis, and he's trying to bring that into the piece. And there is some light creation, I think, in that piece. Like if you think, I mean, this is again my personal approach to this, but if you think Colin's piece is closer to the sky, then maybe Lev's piece is all about gravity and about the soil and the earth. There's something incredibly grounding also in that piece, and it maneuvers between different categories, different musical genres almost, if you want. And it has these aspects also back to improvisation. There are so many parts of that piece that is open actually for different solos to take different solos. You see the percussion taking a solo, you see one of the violins taking solo, you see myself, taking a solo. So that is, and you feel the energy of that in the piece. And I think the contrast between all these pieces, in the element, everywhere, everything is falling everywhere, Starlighter and Dabke Martens. I think we have a large scope of what chamber music is. And I like to describe this CD as, or this album, as music that is inspired by certainly a multitude of traditions without being limited by any. That's how I see it. And I think that's what we try to bring to it collectively.
Well, it's a wonderful recording and so well recorded. I mean, it sounds like the instrumentalists are right there in your room with you, you know, when they play the way that it was recorded. So it is available digitally all over the place. You can find it at all the usual suspects. We'll link to that from our posting of this interview. The recording is called Starlighter, right? And it just came out a few days ago. So get it while the getting's hot, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was released 3 days ago. Now today we were like September 11. It was released on September 8th, and we're super excited. So share it, listen to it and listen to it again. I think this is something that I always like to say about new music. I always listen to like music twice at least for me to get at least an introduction of what these composers and musicians want to tell us.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take your advice and go listen again to the album. Kinan Azmeh, wonderful clarinetist, composer, appearing on the latest album from Brooklyn Writer, which is from Inner Circle Records, which is fronted by Johnny Gandelsman, who's one of the violinists in the
Right.
ensemble. Also Colin Jacobson's music there, along with yours, and also Lev Zhurbin, also known as Liova, right?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate your talking about the music and the stories behind the music.
Thank you very much for your wonderful questions, and I look forward to the next time we speak.